Welcome back to another episode of The Writer's Hive, where we attempt to demystify the writing and publishing process in order to create a writer's hive mind. As always, I have Julie and Amber with me. And this episode, we are talking about when you sit down for your next book idea, are you thinking about marketing trends and trying to sell your book up front? Or do you just choose a project based on what you are interested at the time and then worry about the market later? So we are going to start with Julie.
I have two different experiences with this. For A Curse and Ash, I sat down and I wrote my book that I really, really wanted to tell. I hadn't read a craft book. I was not deeply entrenched in any kind of publishing world or news or keeping track really of anything. I was an avid reader, but I wasn't paying attention to market trends, what was selling, what was releasing. I just knew that was the story I wanted to tell. So I sat down and I wrote it. Turns out it wasn't the most market friendly thing in the whole world because I wrote something a little bit more niche and that didn't fall into what you might call bookstore, bookshelf genres, right? So it's a little bit of a mashup of maybe a paranormal romance and not quite urban fantasy, more contemporary fantasy. So it would be hard to shelve, which means it's usually a harder sell to publishers and to agents. So that one, I think it was just early and I hadn't really given any thought to market trends or how I would query and sell the book, how I would package it. And I won't say it hurt me because obviously I found a home for it and, it'll be coming out on October 5th. So it didn't do horribly. It wasn't the worst thing in the world, but it did make the experience trying to get it out to the world a little bit harder. Because of that, I did sit down at some point during the whole writing experience and say, what else am I passionate about? What else do I enjoy reading and think I'm good at writing that I could do that would be more marketable, that may get me an agent that I could potentially traditionally publish? What else could I do that would be more market friendly? And I came up with adult women's fiction, adult contemporary, and I came up with a story that I absolutely love that I wrote that now, I'm querying and hopefully going to, put out to the world as well. So for that, I specifically looked at, prior to writing, reader expectations in the genre that I was writing in, other authors that wrote in that genre and what was successful for them, what worked for them. Because it was the first time that I looked at what a reader in a genre expects from the genre. And it was the first time that I really gave serious consideration to how I would write a book for the readers of that genre. I wrote A Curse and Ash because I love the story, I love the characters, and how I told it was just how the book came out. For my adult contemporary, I really looked at, this is what most readers who read adult contemporary expect out of a book. This is the things that they're going to be looking for, that if they don't get, they may not love this book. And thankfully, a lot of those expectations were already woven into my storyline, and I didn't have to change the way that I write to fit what the readers would want, which to me felt like a really good thing. I was writing the story that I was really passionate about for readers who then would have all of their qualifications and, standards met throughout the story, which is perfect. That's a great blending. And I think it'll be a lot easier to find my readers knowing that I fell within the guidelines of that genre and reader expectations naturally. I did not change the way that I write, and I did not change the way that I approach a story, except for knowing up front that, yes, I was hitting XYZ benchmark for what would hopefully lead to 5-star reviews and happy readers. And I would say that obviously writing the adult contemporary was much easier than writing A Curse and Ash. It was a fast process. It was a very natural process. It didn't have the same kind of ups and downs and age changes and genre changes that A Curse and Ash had. And I think that really just came from putting a little bit of forethought into the marketability and the genre, which I just had not done for Curse and Ash. And it was more me being an inexperienced writer than anything else. But I think that it really did help me in the long run to put a little bit of forethought into the adult contemporary. And it doesn't feel like, I think a lot of people feel like if you write to market or if you write to reader expectations, that it's selling out or it's somehow hindering or sacrificing creative inspiration and creative control. And I didn't feel that at all with my contemporary. Knowing what I was writing to and whom I was writing to, having the reader in mind as I wrote ended up being a really helpful tool. And at no point did I feel like I was sacrificing things that I wanted to do with the story in order to please the reader sitting in front of me when I was writing, which felt really, really important to me because I didn't want to do that. And then even still, I think that my adult contemporary kind of reaches that same point that A Curse and Ash did, where it kind of blends genres a little bit. It ends up being a little bit more women's fiction in that it focuses on a woman and her journey and her relationships and her career, but it also kind of walks that more romancy, or had walked that more romancy, like Talia Hibberty Brown sisters, with like the snark and the open door smexy times, which I ended up closing up a little bit just to fit one genre over the other. So that was really the only sacrifice that I made, was kind of honing back on the adult smexy time to make it fit a little bit cleaner into the adult contemporary and women's fiction genre in terms of marketability. But if an agent came to me and said, hey, we would like to kind of just shift this a little bit, it would be very easy for me to go back and make it just more of like a general smexy time. And that's a good thing to have because I know that it was already kind of there and I have some deleted scenes where I know I can plug them back in. So that's the only place where I felt like it was not a sacrifice, but just a shifting of the way that I had originally written it to make it a little bit more shelvable in one specific category as opposed to a little broader. But yeah, I've kind of done it both ways. I found it a whole lot easier to put a little bit of forethought into that. But again, I wouldn't let it shape or change too much the way that I write, as an author. And I want to still be proud of the story when I'm done. And I very much am.
So my experience is both different and similar at the same time. So the first time that I wrote a book was for NaNoWriMo in 2010. So a very long time ago. And when I started writing, I had always wanted to write, but I never even thought about the market. I never thought about even honing in a genre. So like as an author, like focusing a genre, I never considered anything except for what do I want to write. So I wrote like a vampire, adult, like erotica, and then I wrote a YA fantasy series, and then I wrote adult sci-fi. And like I just was writing the stories that I wanted to write. And it wasn't until I started taking writing more seriously and started reading crafting books and everything that I started to hone in at least on a genre that I wanted to write. And what's funny is after that, I saw a video that was basically from a traditionally published author talking about how there were certain genres that were dead and how the market was moving in a different direction. And every idea that I had was a part of that dead genre selection that she had. And it killed me a little bit because then I was like, I'm never going to be able to sell these. I'm I'm wasting my time. So then I did also, I think me and Julie together tried to come up with a more market friendly idea, and we both did. However, she found the passion in her story. I never really did. I've written multiple times, tried to write on it, written over 50,000 words in the book. However, every time I work on it, I just get to this point where I'm like, I'm boring myself because I'm just going through the motions of writing the words and I'm not super excited or passionate about it. And I think I've just realized that maybe I'm a niche writer. Maybe my genre is something that I just need to find my small subset of readers and just move forward and just write the things that I want to write about. What's funny though is that the last book I remember feeling actually really excited about was a vampire book, and that was my first book, was a vampire book. I've always loved writing vampires, but vampires had come and gone. But the funny thing is if I would have just went forward with writing my passion book that I was excited about and finished it, vampires are now making a resurgence. I would have hit the market at the exact time that my genre was, that I was niche in, was actually coming into being market friendly. And I'm a little mad at myself for that. But that goes to show sometimes you can't predict what the market is going to do. You know, YA fantasy was an easy sell for years. Now it's not. Things are moving a different direction. So had you written that YA fantasy in 2012, 2013, you probably sold it and been market friendly. But if you wanted to write YA fantasy now, it's not that you can't sell it, and there's no genre that you can't sell. It's just it's going to be harder. So I think for me, I don't see anything wrong with writing to the market, writing to reader expectations. I think that's amazing. You're going to be successful in finding your readers if you give them what they want. But just for me, I've just come to the conclusion that I'm just a niche writer, and it's also okay.
So many great points. Everything that you two said. I did want to touch on, Amber, your point about not being passionate, because I think that is very important, because I have fallen into that in the past where I've worked within a genre that I like, but I'm not passionate about it. And it really makes a difference. And it, as Julie was saying, like, you want to have that ease when you're writing. You want to be excited to write a book. And then if you're not passionate about it, like, that will display within the words, and it'll also display like in your heart, not to be woo woo about it, but it's just, if you're not passionate about, why would you do it? That type of thing. And I know some people are able to do that. You're able to strip, you want to sell a book, or if you're writing specifically to market or rapid releasing, you may or may not be passionate about it, but that's your prerogative to do that. So I just thought that was a really good point, and I wanted to mention it. In terms of my experience with writing in this sense, my first book was, which I think is very consistent with a lot of authors who are first starting out, we do write whatever is in our brain at the time and something that we're so excited to write. And then, you always have the idea of your book being on a bookshelf. So you then sort of work to try to fit it into a market, whether that's in your editing or you find an agent who's also passionate about that as well. But as I went on with traditional contracts, you do have the option clause in the contract, which means depending on how tight it is, depending on if you or your agent negotiated it a certain way, the publisher sort of has that right of refusal. And at least in my experiences, I had a really close relationship with my editors previously, and we sort of had discussions about what I should write next. And that's where it sort of came into the process of me eventually not becoming passionate about these projects. I love to write them. I love these books. I would never say I hated them, but it just got to the process where when you're so focused on the market, that may just not be you. You may be a niche writer like Amber, you mentioned. And I feel like that's where I'm at now, as I've sort of moved away from traditional contracts and my most recent experience querying an adult thriller that I absolutely love. And then people to say, well, you should do this and you should do that. And it would totally change my story. And then I was sort of backsliding into the instance of editors telling me what to do and how to change my book, which I tended to ignore previously, but I am no longer doing that as I'm self-publishing. So I feel like I am very niche, and I cannot, when I'm starting a project, think about who I'm going to sell it to, because that will completely derail my process. I know what I like to write, and I know I'll find my readers, and it's just going to sometimes take more time when you don't think about it up front, but that's okay, because the process is going to be a lot more easy for most people if you are excited about the project or just writing what you love. So there's no right or wrong answer in that sense. If you're able to, if you love a whole bunch of genres and you love writing them and you want to sell them and they are on trend, absolutely do it. But don't be discouraged either. because, you know, there's no shortage of readers. And especially with the, you know, bigger boom of indie publishing now, you're getting so many different types of books out there that readers have never seen before, because they're writers who are taking chances, blending genres, not being in that more traditional sense bookshelf friendly, as Julie mentioned. So I'd say, you know, do what you want to do in that sense, but, you know, you may have to work a little bit more if you are not writing to these market trends.
You know, what's also something that I've seen too is it's hard to even define market, because the market is different everywhere. So for instance, the market for US thrillers is a different look than market for UK thrillers or Australian thrillers, because in the UK, their thrillers usually push boundaries that the US ones won't. And so like Alice Feeney and, you know, Catherine Ryan Howard are all these UK based thriller writers that will go there and push buttons, and I eat it up. Like I'm one of their like readers because I love it. And whereas if you tried to sell that book just as a US author in the US, a lot of, you know, publishers are going to be like, whoa, that's taking it too, I don't, that's not going to work here. But if you think about the book that you've written and you're excited about, if you're getting that feedback, you can always try to maybe query UK based agents and, you know, stuff to see if maybe they have a market for you. And then again, the market in the indie world, in self-publishing world, is a completely different market than in the traditionally published world. So as indie authors, people that write like horror and like haunted house horror is really popular. And there's authors that are making great money doing that. And there's authors that are making great money doing paranormal romances. And there's authors making great money doing erotica and, you know, the like weird erotica that was like, you know, Kindle Unlimited, but they're successful in that market. That you could never sell that to a traditional publisher. So you just have to look at like what you want. Like you can write the book that you want, and sometimes that book will be market friendly without even trying, because maybe you want to write like a Nora Roberts type of romance. That's always going to be market friendly, right? And maybe that's what you love. But sometimes if you write something that's maybe a little bit out of your current market, maybe look at other markets to see if you're, you know, you could be more market friendly somewhere else.
And in addition to that, you know, Amber, you were saying about UK agents. I have never had an agent, and my publisher was a small press, was an imprint of one of the big five in the UK. So I wonder if that's why my books did a little better with them, because they were a little different with a lot of the niche parts of it. But you don't necessarily have to do the traditional big five route. You can look at, you know, smaller presses, whether or not they're part of the big five, independent presses, or even in different countries. Like there's so many opportunities now, you know, with the digital first and digital only publishing houses, that you will be able to find your readers. And if you choose to write something a little more niche, it may take you a little bit more time, but just keep writing what you want to write, because that's what's going to make everyone happy. It's going to make you happy. It's going to make your readers happy, you know, once you find them.
It's also interesting to think of digital first and digital only, because a lot of those publishers are going to be willing to take a chance on a more niche story because there's less overhead. You know, they're just putting out as an ebook. So if it doesn't do well, they're not missing out on all the like the printing costs and having books sit in a warehouse that they can't sell. So if you do have a more niche, maybe start to, like, I didn't even know digital first or digital only existed until I met you, Kate, and started hearing like you talk about like your journey. So to me, I'm like, oh, maybe some of my stories that I really want to tell would be great for a digital first type of publisher. And my idea of success in 2010 when I wrote my first book, and my idea of success now in a more like computer centric world is different stories. So I would be, as long as I could find my readers, however I can find them, whether it's self-publishing, digital first, or a big five, like either way, like I would be happy to find my small subset of readers.
So my question is, even if you are in a niche market or you're not exactly writing to that, like a specific genre, or even if you're writing in a specific genre, but you're bending a lot of like the traditional genre rules, are you still reading within that genre, looking at what the standard expectations are for that genre? So if you think about like a romance, like you need a happily ever after, you need like, you know, they have to come together, come apart, you know, whatever the genre standards are. And then you're twisting them and playing with them because that's what you enjoy doing and you're like deviating from the norm, or are you literally paying attention to like none of that when you're sitting down to write? Because I'm always curious how much you look at a genre before you start writing in it. Because when I wrote A Curse and Ash, I had read urban fantasy. Contemporary fantasy wasn't really a thing, so I just kind of did my own thing and went, meh, people will find it, people won't. You know, I'm really proud of it. I think it works within like a paranormal romance, or it works within a contemporary fantasy, adult fantasy. I think that is fine. And I don't think that it's bad or unmarketable. Obviously, I'm, you know, marketing it. But in terms of my contemporary adult, I really did pay a little bit more attention on the forefront on like what that means, what the actual definition of women's fiction is, what the actual definition of adult contemporary is, and what that might mean for my story. And then I did try to read, you know, a little bit broader within those genres just to kind of understand what works and what doesn't. Is that something that you bother doing if you already consider yourself like a niche writer?
I love that question. I think it's a very interesting question. So for me, I don't tend to read books to study them, fiction books that I write within my genre. It's sort of a strange process now that I'm thinking about it. So usually I'll get interested in a genre and then binge the books like crazy. So for instance, my adult thriller, I really had this nice binge of UK thrillers, which we were discussing how different they are. And for me, they're very different. I don't live in the UK, so maybe that's how we're sort of at that domestic thriller, psychological thriller here. That may be just a standard over there. But for some reason, there was something always so different about these books. And reading as many as I did, none of them I could really pinpoint what was like why I felt like this way. And none of them were really consistent either, even among the same author, like in their different books. So I find that I don't know if it's the writer inputting themselves into a genre, which I really like. So it's something like, okay, I like creepy things, but we'll go for Alice Feeney. Like she just writes like some crazy stuff in there. And I just think as a thriller writer, I think of some crazy stuff too. And I just put it in there and see what happens. And I just think that may be the difference. It may just be that personal thing. It may just be the writer. That's what makes it unique, but I don't necessarily follow specific trends in that sense when I read. I just find the things that I really love. And then maybe that's the inspiration, just writing what I love and just sort of adding on to the creep factor in the case of the thrillers, or just knowing that I can go a little wild with it and not have to worry about it. But that also may be an indie thing as well, because I know if I did want this book to be traditionally published, but I just had a feeling from the onset it wasn't going to be because of these market trends, which is why I love indie publishing now, because I'm able to really just take it to where I want to take it. And then, reading these books previously, I know there's an audience for it, and I just have to, bring them in.
Yeah, so for me, previously, I would write a book or write an idea down and then try to genre it, and always had an issue with, well, it kind of fits into 2 to 3 genres. Like it has been a struggle for me for years to try to find just one genre that it can fit in, because I tend to, like, I love thrillers and I love paranormal, and I love it when thrillers try to play with that, like, is it paranormal, is it not? And I like it both. Sometimes when they go the streamline route where it's not thriller or not paranormal at all. But I also love when they go there and they make it something paranormal. And that's kind of hard because that would fit into, if it's paranormal and it's a thriller, that kind of fits into two categories. But I've always just not really thought about genre as I was writing until more recently when I tried to write, which is funny because whenever my idea for my contemporary in my head, it was an adult rom-com. But what I actually plotted out and wrote was actually a women's fiction. It wasn't a rom-com at all. But I didn't know that. I didn't even think about that. I was like, oh, I want it to be about these two people. But then it somehow just more became about her and her journey with her career. And then I started to read more books and tried to fit it into this rom-com category, and it just didn't, because it's not what I was writing. I didn't know it. That's not what I was writing. But yeah, I've never really tried to fit myself into a genre except for that one time, and it hasn't worked out well for me. It's caused a lot of anxiety.
So for me, I think I kind of touched on that in my answer earlier, but I want to say that I don't necessarily read super broadly beforehand before writing, just because I read super broadly anyway. So I don't specifically aim to go and read in whatever I'm writing at that moment. And I certainly don't read in that genre while I'm actively writing it, but I will look at the general structure of that genre and what reader expectations are for that genre. Even if I subvert them or play with them a little bit, I want to know what a reader wants from that kind of a genre and what their expectations are. I don't want to wholly disregard that and or write to none of them, even if I only write to the ones that feel right for me. I don't want to wholly disregard that, because I think that then puts you in a place where you're, I don't want to say trying too hard to be different, but then you're really alienating a lot of the people that would naturally come to that genre. And I never want to do that. I never want a reader to come to me and say, you marketed it as this, and it has zero of the standard, requirements and or reader expectations for that genre. So even if they might not get a traditional happy ever after, I want them to get their version of a happy ever after. Like, I don't want to completely disregard the standard market, benchmarks for a genre, even if I mess with them a little bit, or they might be partially from this genre and partially from that genre. I want to understand both of them enough to mix them and marry them in a way that makes sense to a reader, as opposed to pulling in things from other genres or completely ignoring and leaving out certain things from those genres that a reader might want. Because at the end of the day, I want to write a story that I love, but if I am literally the only person that can love it because it doesn't match any of the reader expectations, then I'm also missing the point. Like, I want my work to be shared and I want it to be enjoyed. And if I'm not paying attention to that even a little bit, then I feel like I'm doing a disservice to my readers, and I wouldn't want to do that. So
it's also good to note that genres itself are just a construct, so they flow and change over time. So for instance, go back, a few years, and these books started coming out and they were different. So they said, oh, you know what? These are urban fantasies because they're like in this urban environment and they have this like certain feel to them. So like, we're going to shelve them. We're going to create a new genre called urban fantasy. And then you had people starting to publish those, like the Sookie Stackhouse series and all this. And then suddenly you had some of these writers like Laurel K. Hamilton, and you had there's another one I can't think of, but they were like, you know what? They're kind of urban fantasy, but they're more like a romance. So we're going to make another genre called paranormal romance, and we're going to have that as a separate shelf. And then they were really the same thing, but one focused more on romance, one focused more on just like the main character. And then as people stopped reading them, they mushed them together. And then they just now are just in fantasy. Like they don't even exist anymore. So you could accidentally, without even trying to, create a whole new genre, but you also can't expect to create a whole new genre, if that makes sense.
So our question of the episode has sort of changed a little bit as we've evolved through our conversation. So we would love to know, when you are looking at your next book idea to write, do you look at market trends / reader expectations, genre expectations, or are you more of, you just write what you're passionate about at the time and then worry about all of that later on once the book is done and whether or not you're going to self-publish or traditionally publish? So be sure to let us know in the comments. And as always, if you have any ideas or topics you would like us to cover, put those in the comments as well. And if you want to follow any of us on any other platform, we have all of our social links in the description box below, along with a playlist of all of the Writers Hive episodes. And in 2 weeks, we will have our next episode on Julie's channel. So we will see you then. Bye-bye. What do you want?
It's not that simple.
Food. I just want food.
It's like that gif from what the hell's that movie with Rachel McAdams and
Yeah, the Notebook.
The Notebook.
the Notebook. What do you want?
I know, she's like, it's not that simple.
It isn't. It never is.